think we should ask Seema to unmute herself. Seema, you should unmute yourself.
Hi.
Yeah. Shall we start? 2 more minutes. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Good evening, friends. I'm happy to welcome you to this round of discussion on the Reading Hub. The book we are going to discuss this evening is Sumitra and Danish. It is by Seema Chisthi. This book documents a very, very interesting stage of India's cosmopolitan, inclusive reality. And this cosmopolitan inclusive reality becomes so important because today is also the day when we are remembering Jawaharlal Nehru, the architect of modern India. When the Nehru's Memorial Day, it's important to have Sumitra and Danish. I would like to start with a simple question about the decisions taken by your father's family to stay back in India during the partition, how that aspect played out, because there is a lot of reference to it in the book. We'll start with that. The very idea to stay back in India during partition.
So, they always tell you in a maths paper to attempt the easy questions first, but I'm glad you adopted the absolute reverse strategy of the toughest question first. So I think this is a very significant question about what prompted their family, like millions of other families, to stay back in India, and which was an important reason why India was to be a secular democratic republic as it was, in their absence, assuming that all, say, even North Indian Muslims would have left for Pakistan. We wouldn't have had much of a choice. You would have had the sense of a Hindu nation facing off to an Islamic nation. I think there is, at a very personal level, I think that there was a discussion in the family. Clearly, I have not got into that much detail from what I remember my grandmother telling me and my father and my various uncles and aunts, that there was a debate. But I think my grandfather was very clear about staying back in India. There was never an issue about that. I think he was what you might call a nationalist Muslim in those times. And he felt very strongly about this. And I think my father's family, they actually come from Jaunpur, which is in East UP, but not Devariya. And they were driven out after the revolt, the Gadar of 1857, and they sort of hid in obscurity in Devariya, which was a very nondescript, very small place. So my aunts and uncles could never really reconcile to Devariya's reality from stories and all they had heard about the backdrop of Jaunpur. So I think it was a very clear decision to stay back because there was full confidence and faith that a plural India as existed then, even in a small way as it did in Devariya, was in Eastern UP, was the reason why they should trust and have faith. And I think the person whose death anniversary we mark now, Jawaharlal Nehru, played a very important role. But I think also Nehru has to be seen in the context of the national movement that he was part of, which was very much kind of the backdrop for what happened and from where Syed Muhammad Chishti and his other brothers and siblings would have chosen, because I think it was a national movement that forged afresh the whole idea of India as what would be there once the Brits left. And that was something that appealed to thousands and millions of people like my grandfather. And they stayed back on faith, partly, and partly because it was homeland, and partly because there was a trust and belief from the ideas and everything that had come out from so it seemed perfectly rational, logical to believe in a secular, inclusive, wholesome idea that India would be after freedom. And it was that faith and trust on which they kind of stayed back.
Thank you. Before getting to other questions, I would like to know why you decided to take the idea of recipe book to bring out the composite nature of India.
Okay, so partly Paneer, my mother had left behind a recipe book, and as she indicates in her introduction, she wrote this 3 times. I think we were all such useless people. Once I stayed away from Delhi for 2 years, I lost the first edition somewhere and the second one. So partly, of course, it's a mother, a working mother in India who wanted her daughter to not be tied down by kitchen realities as a necessity. So it was always posed as a choice. So she really wanted to leave something behind. This is pre-YouTube days of being able to tune into recipes and all. So she wanted me to have the luxury of being a luxury she never had as a young person. She had to kind of make adai and atta, etc., before her, graduation exams and all also. So I think she wanted to leave behind recipes which I could dip into and make without it being this burden on my head. So I could just look in and look at the instructions. Therefore, there's also the recipe on how to make rice, just plain rice. And I was a bit embarrassed about letting it be in the book. But then I thought, I should be honest about it. She did leave behind a recipe to make plain rice and I should let it be. So I thought, it was fortuitous that mother had written this. But I also thought that it speaks so much to our reality currently. A lot of, Akhlaq was killed because people decided to go into his fridge and examine. They actually entered the house, went to his kitchen or wherever the fridge was, and pulled out the meat because they thought that was part of what akhlaq had to prove in order to be a true Indian. So I think our kitchens, our refrigerator, the very persons we are, what objects we use, whether we use Patanjali things or not, what we eat, which side we turn to. Does somebody turn to the east to pray or to the west to pray, or does somebody choose not to pray at all? All of that has become, the personal is being made so completely not just political. I think sometimes your life depends on it, on who you are, how you were named, the whole lottery of birth. So it's being kind of pushed so much into the foreground that it was high time that we voluntarily kind of put it out. And I thought it's very important to kind of put it out because this is also not some fancy recipes. I see a lot of recipe books coming out about, very intricate forms of, Awadhi king cuisine or Nizama, the Nizam's kitchen, etc. Well, this is not the Nizam's kitchen. This is not some Maharaja's kitchen. This is a very ordinary kitchen, which kind of grew out of two people having to make their place and their way in a city, which was also finding its own feet in New Delhi. So I saw kind of strands of cosmopolitanism. I saw also strands of ordinary but shared and good quality cooking, because the food in my house was actually very good and acknowledged by people, but not good because it was so very royal, etc. But they got their recipes right. They kept them together. So I thought it worked as a nice metaphor, coincidentally, because Ma had left a recipe book behind, but also because of what is happening and around us in things being pulled out and all. So instead of having this insane discussion about biryani, which is also, it can be very quite horrific. I remember when Ajmal Kasab, etc. also, then the public prosecutor said he made up those biryani tales. So at a time like this, when all this is the haldi or the mirch, everything is being made part of a discussion about life and death and citizenship, I should do my bit by dragging it out of my parents' kitchen.
This idea of using humble khichdi as the most inclusive dish, how did you hit upon that?
So I think this, my publisher and Siddhesh, etc., because we were stumbling on what the name should be like, and the khichdi at various times, like the mongrel, the creole, or the bastard, it's kind of seen as khichdi, don't just feed me khichdi. But the point is, as people say that, when the body is sick or all that, khichdi is the only thing that goes. But I think more than that, and I like the way Veer Sanghvi in his afterword to my book, very kindly written afterword to the book, he goes and completely demolishes the idea that khichdi is vegetarian. So it is a mix of actually everything. So I think khichdi, again, in the subset of food, worked as a good way to kind of convey what it's like when in the potpourri of life, what happens when rice and pulses, dal, meats, some spices are all cooked together, and it tastes damn good.
With these few questions, we would like to know about your mother's journey from Mysore to North India and how this book emerged.
Okay. So I'll start with the second part about why this book emerged. I've also kind of thought about it a lot because I'm not a fan of fellow journalists who put themselves in the center of the story. There is a very powerful school of selfie journalism and a school that believes that you need to kind of center yourself in the story. So I have done work all my 3 decades as a journalist by trying to minimize my life's events. So it was actually a very difficult decision for me to put this out. And I was actually quite frightened in the 15 days prior to the release of the book. And I was wondering if I'd just done absolutely the wrong thing by going and putting out my dead parents' story, in this kind of throwing it in this cauldron of hate, which I see around me at a time when they won't be there to defend themselves or talk about it. But then I thought very hard and I thought I had kind of done the right thing. So a lot of people would think that it comes out of grief of losing my parents. I'm the only child. But I realized that that's part of the story. It's the law of life that you lose your parents, you outlive parents is the tragedy. And that's also something that I've experienced in my families of losing children is horrible. So in a sense that, it's unthinkable and shouldn't happen to any parent. So losing parents is fine. It's a natural course of life. So I think more than the grief of losing my parents, I think the world that kind of took shape in India on their loss, made me quite sure that I should write this book and I should just talk about 2 people who did this. There are 2 factors really. One is, of course, the UP campaign in 2017, where a very powerful part of what the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, spoke in February 2017 and clearly came out and spoke of the politics of between the Qabristan and the Shamshan. That my father was still alive, but that really shook me because so far we were all told that at least when how you are born and when you die, you all sort of meet the same maker. So all of this strife and the battles are all fought while you're on earth. But when you finally reach your end, it's all the same. But in that sameness discourse, there was this divisive idea of a Shamshan being different from a Qabristan. So that I found like really stark. And I thought that really crossed a line. But so my father was alive then, but he went and died in 2018. And after that, I had to, of course, bury my father. My mother was very clear she wanted to be cremated. So mummy was cremated, her ashes poured in the Kaveri and in Ganga. And then my father died. He's in a Qabristan near Jamia Millia. So then I realized that it just felt equally horrible, and I was sort of equidistant or equi-close from between my parents, and the Shamshan and the Qabristan feeling was the same. So that also drew me to a point that somebody has to kind of interrupt this mad discourse by actually talking about our lives. And the second closely related thing to that is there is a conspiracy now to portray cosmopolitanism, as is this conspiracy, I think, everywhere globally as well, to portray cosmopolitanism coming together, Ganga, Jamuni, if you like, or fusion as something which is deracinated. The elite have it. You speak in English about it. It's something which is city, urban, all of that. It has nothing to do with the real masses. And we see that in the discussion, which even our foreign minister says that, now that India is a genuine democracy, quote unquote, when he was asked a question on Hindutva. So I needed to kind of break that also by saying it is not some airy-fairy elite thing which is happening somewhere else or to some other people. But my parents are first generation migrants. They were not, they were elite in a different way, not in a moneyed elite at all. They were educated and they aspired to read more and write more, no doubt. But so I just wanted to I thought that the only way we can actually start puncturing these narratives is by talking about real lived lives, that maybe we should stop using the word idea of India, because it is actually, it's a lived reality. It's not an idea of India. In fact, it's this other funny ideas of going back to a mythic past, about constructing the future, actually losing our future in the quest for a very divisive, distorted idea of the past that is in progress. So those are the 2 main reasons why I kind of wrote the book. As far as my mother's journey, my mother was actually born in Arsikere, which is now in Hassan district. It used to be Chikmagalur then. And she made a journey to Mysore because she lost her father very early, and then her mother and she, because they were at this very her elder sister-in-law who was quite keen to get her married off early. And there was something which always kind of guided Sumitra. She didn't kind of like this very much about being pushed around. She just wanted to read and write. And in fact, it was almost obsessive that she wanted to just learn more, read more, and she wanted to do economics, which people thought was At that time, it was not kind of done very much. So a lot of their classes were in Maharaja's college in Mysore, though she was in Maharani's college. But she went and kind of graduated, and she did very well. She was among the first, she was the first who gets a gold medal for her BA. She tops. And it's so funny that people were surprised that a woman had topped, and then economics. And then, so a bunch of her very well-meaning teachers actually came home to just confirm that she was not a Brahmin, because, she's a Rajput, she's a Kshatriya. Rajputs, by the way, in Karnataka are OBCs currently. So, but they had to come at that time to confirm that she was not Brahmin and she was a woman. So it's a remarkable journey of her kind of struggling through all of that, and coming to Delhi, which was like another big journey, which took 2 trains and a bus ride to get from Mysore to Delhi to finally pursue her doctorate, because she refused to get married early, and very much supported by her brother, who took charge of her. So, and of course, she comes to Delhi, and then she meets Anis, and she takes the plunge.
It is a very bold decision for a person who was the elderly woman to marry a man who was younger to her. What gave her the courage to take that decision at that point of time?
Yeah, no, that's true. Actually, as a child, I was just telling a friend of mine that the one thing I used to find scandalous about my parents' marriage, which I never spoke about, was their age difference. Because I said, this is like, this is not romantic. Mother is so much older than my dad, kind of thing. And that's the one thing which nobody's commented on now, because things have so changed so much that which I was very proud of being, North, half South, and half Hindu, half Muslim. But for me, that was the most scandalous thing. I think her innate courage and self-belief that she had kind of held out. And secondly, I think my father was also kind of mature beyond his years. So I think they were married at 26. But he was 26. So he was he was kind of older beyond his years in that sense. And so I think that kind of helped that relationship to get nurtured. And also, I think broadly, Anis's family broadly accepted it. My paternal side broadly accepted it. You may argue that that's because she agreed to a nikah, or she couldn't be bothered what method there was. Though, of course, there were people at that time who told her, why are you having a nikah? Anis will marry 3 times. And she had some very tough answers for them, saying that it's going to end anyway. If he has to go, he's going to go, So a nikah doesn't bother me. But ritual didn't bother her. I think her deep courage and maybe a desire to also sort of not just move around, as they called it then, with Anis, but to make a life with him.
What are the factors you discovered whenever you thought about various ingredients which comes through these recipes, about the range of Indian reality or the plurality of India?
Yeah. A lot, because a lot of those things are, a lot of it is very routine stuff. I mean, some of it, Jaipal, Javitri and all, are kind of rare spices that you'll find, nutmeg, etc. But the other stuff is kind of very routine. And of course, as I was kind of researching that and talking to people when I was trying to put the book, the recipe book part of it together, it actually spoke to me much more about the plurality of India, because a lot of the majority of what we eat, minus tapioca, perhaps, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know, is not Indian in that sense. The tea or the coffee we wake up with, the potato, the cauliflower, the tomatoes, even chilies. We're known as this hot curry nation and all that. But chilies are just apparently 15th century. So all that, the ingredients, even spices, etc., woke me up to the reality of, who belongs where, and when one makes a journey to what place and starts belonging to another place, and where do you kind of shut it down to starting the whole discussion on you are native and I'm not. So when did my mother also start belonging to Delhi and was no longer a person of Mysore? Or for my father, or for myself, I was always asked, where do you come from? And I would say, I'm half Mysorean and I'm half from Dravidian, which, is that correct or not? Because I'm a Delhi-born person. So yeah, and food also very starkly brings it down, and also because we consume it 3 times a day. So I think it's also through food that these ingredients, that you can actually also tell a story which you don't have to spin, or just looking at it and looking at where these things came from tells you what the whole plural story of India, the subcontinent, is.
before opening up, do you have any interesting tales to say about the part which you have left out in the book? Because always people leave out something in the book.
Yeah. So, yeah, lots of other details have been left out. And my father would be appalled. I'm glad they were both borderline atheists. They were agnostic atheists. So there's no chance of any soul hanging around to get offended by this. But I mean, he would have hated it if I had kind of written all this. But one thing was quite poignant, and it's Nehru's death anniversary today, which I left out. I don't know why it got left out. It could have gone in. Is that they actually, the one thing that they remember they were both at, and before they knew each other, in the same year that they met in 64, was at Nehru's funeral. So it so happened that my father's entire family was visiting his sister, who was married in Pakistan. And then Nehru dies, and he was left in charge of his uncle's house as a 25-year-old man or whatever. And he was quite panicky because he said, oh my God, Nehru is dead, now what? And so he rushed to the funeral, and he sort of went, and this was in St. Stephen's College, so he rushed to close to where the Red Fort is, and he stood, and it was all very chaotic, and he was very distressed and by himself, and hoping that his sister and his brother-in-law make their way back quickly from Pakistan, because what's going on. And my mother, on the other hand, was equally distressed, and she apparently was crying copious tears. So a very dear family friend's daughter took her to the funeral, and she's of course Tani Bhargav, and she remembers, and she said that Sumi auntie just kept crying, and Tani was very little then, and so she also started crying about, why is that Sumi auntie is crying so much? So they were both there at that funeral. They didn't know each other. It's much later that they connected and said that we were both there, and where were you standing at that time, and where were you? So I thought that was quite poignant. I don't know why it got left out, but that's there. And other things that got left out were, of course, the more kind of intimate details about how they went to Devariya, or to, they went to Mysore later. Yeah, one more interesting story, which is interesting, which I left out. Again, this I know why I left it out, because I didn't want it to offend anybody. But my father was very keen that my mother's side not get told about the wedding, nikah. So mommy was happy, and she decided not to call for it. But my father was really keen that doesn't happen, because his idea of the UP Thakur was a very different one from what the Thakurs, the Kshatriyas of UP would be, of Karnataka were. So when he went back to Mysore, he got this completely different, because he thought they would come on a horseback perhaps and take away Sumitra, and he would not be able to marry her, because it was a very different image that he had. So, but of course, when he goes back to Mysore, he finds that they are quite different from his stereotype of, Thakurs from UP who would not let him whisk his Sayukta and get married, So that is one thing I left out, that I consciously left out.
We'll open up for questions. Any questions? Yes, Ranjan.
You hear me? Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can
you hear him?
Now I can, yes.
Yeah.
Hi, ma'am. Thanks for sharing such wonderful stories. I just have one question. At that point of time, Sumitra and Danish getting married, where do they get the courage from? At this point of time, in now India, it will be a thrilling event only, getting married. So at that point of time, where do they get the courage from? What do you think about?
Yeah, I think this is a question I've tackled with my father, because at one point I did some long audio interviews with him, not knowing where it would go, but I wanted him to document his story of staying back in India and all that when he was alive. And at one time he really lost it with me. He says, you keep saying now, I think this was 2017 or 2016. He says, you keep saying now, as if it was very easy then. It was not very easy then either. And 65 was a very difficult year. There was this war with Pakistan. There was a lot of tension, etc. It's not as if, it's all very, you all think you're living in exceptional times. So that actually got me thinking. And much later now, when I think about it, it's not as if it was very routine then. You're right that they would have to have extraordinary personal courage to cross those lines, because as we all know that endogamy, whether it's caste or religion, is kept as that you can fall in love with somebody, but just don't get married to them. You, okay, caste past, you cross, you have your fun, and you trespass somewhere, but you don't get married. So that's very clearly, so I agree with you. It takes extraordinary personal courage and love and a desire to spend the rest of your life together and accord it kind of recognition from the world that they got married. So it was partly that. But I think the big difference was that at that time, there would be still kind of people who will come and tell you why you're getting married and it's wrong, and you don't do that. The family would, maybe the neighbors would, people in smaller places would find it tougher rather than bigger cities to get married. But right now, you have actually armed kind of mobs, almost militia level of interference, and the state. Earlier, the state did not interfere with it, and it provided for the Special Marriage Act, which allowed you to get married, right? So the state at least did not pretend to be on the other side. At least it pretended to be on your side, encouraging this. Right now, I think the difference is that the state and the mob seem to be in unison, and the objective seems to be to stop these things. So yes, I mean, I think it was deep personal courage, to answer your question, which and love, which probably got them together, and they thought they must do it rather than just be another could have been couple.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oliver? Some question. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me? So, were you ever confused with your identity when you were growing up? To be born into this family and growing up, how did you feel? Like which religion or wherever you grew up? So, how did you feel about that? Were you ever confused about your identity?
Oh, yes, I was. It was not easy all the time. And because at that time, the thing was that we were culturally both religions, but I was not kind of brought up in any faith. So there was a time I used to feel, especially during school years, was a difficult time because there are very fixed kind of ideas. Then it takes some time to be comfortable with being two and being neither. So it's like, so if I was either, so that was a issue. So yes, there was grave confusion. And I think like all kind of, maybe my adolescent identity quest would have got more complicated and complex because of that. And once I tried asking my father, do you believe in God and all? And he was a very gentle person, but he really told me off at that time. He says, something, you don't ask people that question. You have your relationship with the maker, don't ask me. So my conclusion on really is only what I could surmise, that he's more spiritual. He's not an atheist entirely, but but he never told me what religion there was. And he said, no, you'll figure it out. You'll figure out your relationship with your maker if you want to, and you go your way. So yes, I mean, in times like these, which are, it's not always very easy. So while all cultural references were there, we'd celebrate everything and all that. But yes, there was a time of confusion and chaos. And my very dear friend, and I described that in the book, she came and she drew across my chest like that. And she said, "Tu adhi pixie, adhi goblin," that you're half pixie and half goblin. And she ran away. So I still remember that very vividly. She's a very dear friend of mine, Jayati, even now. And I used to, and I said, no, is she kind of mocking at me, or is she kind of helping me reconcile to things? So yeah, I was conflicted, confused. Am I both or neither? Yeah, I was there, but clearly not of the order of confusion, chaos, and distress that would happen now if I was 30 years younger, maybe.
I have a question. You said two neither, half pixie goblin. So was it also kind of liberating at some point? I mean, after you left school, did you find the fact that you had both and neither, and was also sort of liberating in some way?
Hugely so. And now, I mean, I used to think it's a gift. It's actually a gift to be like that. I would listen to Gregor Mendel in biology lessons with great interest on how he found the P's and the recessive gene and the dominant gene. So like with everything, whether it's biology, maths, such a mixture gave it different spin. But yeah, I mean, I was quite proud of it later when I was kind of older. when I went out to make my own life, you write your own story rather than just being your parents' children, then you integrate it more. And yes, it was very liberating and very nice. And also one very good thing, which I remember even as a child, that when I would be in Mysore, and sometimes family discussions get quite crazy, I would think like a Muslim. And when I would be in Devariya, I would just like really kind of, I would want South Indian things, and I would think like a Hindu. So you become a contrarian in your teens as well. So yeah, it's hugely liberating. And the fact that you can choose, and you can choose both or neither and be something else entirely.
Next.
So just a small thing on your confusion thing. I have my youngest son, Danish. It was really crazy because he had all kinds of influences and of all sorts. And his whole obsession was to actually become a Sardar. And I used to and I've taken him to Gurdwaras as a child. He's going to forgive me if he hears this. I used to take him to Gurdwaras as a child, get Kada Prasad. I got him a Kada. A colleague of mine at the Express at that time got him a Kirpan. He was very serious. And then he came one day, and he was still a child. And this was a time when J.J. Singh was the army chief, Manmohan Singh was the prime minister. And he came to me and said, "Ma, I have something to say." I said, "What is it?" And he says, "I want to tell you that I don't want to be a Sardar anymore. I want to be a pilot." And I didn't know whether to laugh or to, how to kind of mask my face. I said, "Why would you?" He says, "It'll be too much work because I've decided that I want to be a pilot when I grow up. And how can I be a Sardar? I'll have to wear that pagri, then I'll have to do all this." I said, "No, you can be both." And I told him that, J.J. Singh is the army chief. We have a prime minister who wears the pagri. So I'm sure, you can prefix things and all. He says, "No, I'd like to kind of just, because he felt that his mother had invested so much in him helping him become a Sardar with the kada and all that he must tell me that." So that was also a great, about what identities can be and what propels people to be that. And the fact that he thought that it's something that you become a pilot. So I'd become a Sardar when I grew up. There's too much boring atheism, Hindu, Muslim happening at home. So I should just be a Sardar.
Hello. Thank you. It is. I've not read your book, but I will definitely. It was very interesting. What I wanted to know was if you can share something about similar stories that your father's contemporaries of similar interfaith marriages that you have also come across, and probably your own contemporaries, and that you all have shared similar stories, challenges, tensions. That will be nice.
That's very nice. Actually, there were these three Muslim men who were, because their wives were very good friends. Rashiduddin Khan had married Leela, his wife. Abid Hussain had married Karki, and Anis had married Sumitra. They were all kind of quite close. So all of us were kids. So we all have interesting names like Vishakha, somebody's Kabir, somebody's Anusha, I'm Seema. So we were roughly contemporaries. So when our parents would meet, we would be kind of pushed into rooms. And one of the children is also Kabir Khan. Anusha and Kabir were siblings. They are Rashiduddin Khan and Leela's children. And we would all be sent off in the rooms while they're having lunch and, adult stuff is going on. You go read your comic books or talk. And at that time, I think we would kind of scheme and plot and wonder about who we were. Those were actually very precious conversations. Now that I think back, we were kids then, in school and all that. So it would be a great case of, we are all sort of half and half. So are we one caste? Should we are we like Amitav Ghosh's kind of Girmitiyas? Are we we didn't say that then naturally, but are we one tribe because we are of, we have different religion, parents and all that. So I think of other couples also that I know now, of course, now it is at another level of, there are people from, Dhanak, and there are group people I know whose job is to provide shelter and support. So I think a lot of the romance has gone out. It's become this survival kit that, you want to marry somebody, your parents don't want you to, or the government doesn't want you to help. So in fact, there's this very interesting film I'd recommend to all of you on Z5. I don't know why it didn't get more publicity than it should have. It's called Love Hostel. And I didn't know this, that it's actually what happens once you get married to somebody of another religion. A religion in this case, but anybody like your parents don't want you to marry. So the government actually provides you with a hostel where you come in, it's, so it's been called a love hostel, where you go and stay there till your parents give written affidavits saying that there will not be honor killings, they will not kill people. So, you stay there till then. So this is, of course, is really kind of I don't want to give the game away, but it's really interesting about and you don't actually figure the religion of the person until well into the middle of the book. So you wonder why they're there at the love hostel. But so that's at now it's become a completely crazy level of hiding, leaving town, changing names. And I remember in 2015 for the Express, I did a series on what this whole nonsense about love jihad, what it, how it actually translates on the ground. And you realize that it's no longer about love, romance, or living together. It tests you completely, tests your survival skills. And also what happens if you have a difference of opinion with somebody who you're married to of another faith. So recently, I think some Arbaz Khan or somebody's got divorced. So after 20 years, and they're very amicable and all, but his wife has taken on her full father's name or whatever, which is a Hindu name. Now that's like spun. So I often think about that, and that's a lot of stress on people. And I've seen that also, Hindu-Muslim couples or intercaste couples. How do you handle a marital dispute, or you handle differences? Do you get divorced, or are you divorcing? Are you putting paid to the larger idea? So that can also be a lot of pressure on them. And because the whole world and society gets involved. So they do get involved in any marriage in India is meant to be this business of, but I think particularly in marriages which are love marriages or marriages where you make your own choice, breaking fundamental barriers, it becomes that much tougher. And I've seen that unfold in several people that I've known. So yeah, of course, tensions persist. And while this story may sound rosy now and they're gone, and it does reveal a lot of kind of issues, a lot of things that lie beneath the surface, which can test couples, which can test love, and it can test big decisions also about, do you kind of go out and divorce? Do you separate? And what do you do? So yeah, you're right. There are lots of stresses and strains, but the nature of those strains and what the beast is has now changed completely, dramatically from what it used to be.
I don't know if you've seen an Instagram page which says India Love Project.
Yes. There's someone in India, yeah.
Yes, which sort of documents the stories of interfaith marriages primarily. So what do you think? I mean, are these just as you said, this is a kind of very different kind of situation that one has to deal with today, because it isn't just about conservatism, or it isn't about that. It's a kind of mob plus state involvement. So do you think these kind of projects, are a drop in the ocean, but you think they progressively help to, change people's mind, or, just how does one deal with the kind of almost, military response to people falling in love? It's kind of, do you think?
Yeah, I've also kind of seen that India Love Project. It's very nice to see that. Of course, there's something that bothers me also, that are we exoticizing the species of interreligious? Are we making too much of it? But I think we've really been left with no choice. Once there's just so much attack, it's been politicized, that I think it helps to bring out all facets of it. So I think where is the problem is if we romanticize it too much or leave it at romance. So this is Shiri Farhad, this is Leila Majnu. That aspect is brilliant. And of course, it should be celebrated. And that's the essence of what brings two people together. But I think to leave it at that may mean that we leave it as it's not really a fight. But I think we have to kind of plow down all the way. And maybe the time has come actually to speak up and speak of these things. In fact, Rukmini's wonderful book on data has this very nice chap in that whole business about marrying, how young people marry now. As you know, interreligious marriages are 2.5%, maybe less. Intercaste are a little higher, they're about 13%. But that also, I think, it may be just between Savarnas. It may not be it will not be Dalits marrying non-Dalits. So I suspect, I don't know if that breakup has been done. This is just intercaste. But in the end, on chap taps, Rukmini tells her that you're asking the wrong question about marriage. You should ask about love. When she says, oh, they're woefully few. So I think that tells us something about how, marriage as this Indian institution it's how you keep caste going, you keep all inequities going, you keep conservatism and patriarchy alive. So it could be it's a mixed thing to then support people of different religions entering into that institutions, no doubt that is there. But I think projects like India Love Project and all are much more important now. And maybe they would later also go into other dimensions of it, which go beyond just the romance and how they got together to what it means, what it results in, what the children do, how it speaks to other aspects of being Indian and of just being human. The fact that you break the endogamy, which is central to how marriages are meant to be, and, keep the property intact or whatever. So I think we need to think much more about this. But I would, if I had to choose between talking about these things and not, I've now come to the conclusion that we must really keep talking about it and pushing it, because part of the silence is because they want others to not know that this exists. I think a big attack on the Khans, for instance, is because they've all married non-Muslims, they married Hindus. So that coolification of the Khan has to be brought down, that he's not a cool guy. They are panchawalas, they are hiding that they are mechanics, they are incredible, the levels of things that people do. But I think it's good to make it okay again and possible again and desirable again. So yeah, I think we should do that at the risk of fighting this exoticization of the phenomenon. But I think we should push ahead with it.
One last question, please.
Yes. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Gautam. I find this story very interesting, and I have some similar case. In fact, my girlfriend is 3 years elder to me, and it's not a question, but I need some tips or what I can find some inspiration from this the story of your dad and mom. That's it.
So 3 years you've done well. Mummy was solid 8 years older, huh? So that's like, you have 5 years thing. So I think it's about how. And I think 3 years is the perfect gap, right? For men, if the man was 3 years older and the woman is 3 years younger. So I think that's a brilliant, I don't think you need more inspiration, but I think it's all because a lot of it is about how mature both of you are and how you, how much space you give each other to be who they are, because there'll always be differences. So even if twins were getting married, as we know, they are different people. So I don't think difference should be allowed to become a point of difference. So there's much more that kind of to look for what actually unites you and to look for the next few years and what you'll do together. I think that should be brilliant, whether she's 3 years older or younger. And there'll be a lot of people, as I told you, this is the one thing that really had me on the defensive, and I was embarrassed about the fact that my mother was much older to my dad as a child. But I think there's a lot of peer pressure around this and a lot of jokes and auntie, and we see how Macron is also ridiculed for marrying somebody much older to him. So that whole patriarchal nonsense carries on, with a woman is not allowed to be older than a man. But I'm sure it's just as joyous, it's as liberating and wonderful. So good luck.
Before we wrap up, one question is, if you have to write the book today, what would have been the changes you would have made? Do you think it would have been the same, or it would have taken a slightly different format?
I would actually have appended all these. I would have gone much more in the law part, because ever since the manuscript was over, in fact, I was telling my publishers that it was meant to be out in January, and the changes that happened in India just from January till about March, April, May, so I didn't want it to become completely irrelevant, because I thought, my God, if it just gets thrown out of the window entirely, that it sounds like complete fiction. So what I would do is, if I was now, I would add many more chapters and take a much closer look at the laws, because these 8 laws that have come in, which want to kind of criminalize conversion. So I would go much more into the legal side, in which how India is being fundamentally, the wiring is being altered without changing the chassis. So you're changing the windows, you're doing everything without really altering the trappings, so that Mr. Modi and Mr. Jaishankar can go out and talk about India, democracy, and sit in D10, whatever the democracy, 10 democratic nations and all that. But inside, you're hollowing out the interior. So I would have fleshed out, I would have done a macro in much more detail. So right now, there's an introduction which kind of tries to set the scene on why that's being told, and then I go into just the story. But I think as we're going along, the luxury of even telling that story is shrinking. The way I see it, it becomes too romantic to tell it. So I would have done the hard bits much more, maybe added a few more chapters on that.
Thank you, Seema, for taking your time off and joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege to waste all of you all's time. Thank you so much for considering the book and hosting me.
Thank you.